Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Is there something you needed?
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, I just want to welcome everybody back to our final session of our conference. And I'm really delighted that we have Kerrie joining us, and she is going to give a talk on Indigenous trauma. And I'm really just delighted that you're able to join us here from Calgary. And I just need to pause here and make sure I've got all my ducks in a row. I want to make sure that we don't have anybody accidentally unmuting themselves. And I think I'm good. So welcome, Kerrie. It's a real delight to have you here. I had the privilege of listening to you speak last year, and your session really stuck with me. So you know, I'm just really glad that when we reached out to you, that you had the time and interest and willingness to come and join us this afternoon. So Kerrie is a Cree. Oh, I have my ability to talk has gone. A Cree Métis elder, originally from Saskatchewan, and comes to us with a lot of experience and insight. And I think that's enough of me. I'm interested more to hear from you. So I'm going to go off camera now, but if you need me, Kerrie, I am here.
Thank you, Sydney.
Okay, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm very honored to be here. Tanse, hello, Oki, Tanshe, Nitana Komuksanaki, Wapan Mihiginagakasqueo. Those are my Indigenous names. One is Cree, one is Blackfoot. I lived in Saskatchewan. That's where I was born. So I was named in Cree, and I have lived in Calgary now for 47 years in the Treaty 7 territory. Where I came from was Treaty 6, and now I'm in Treaty 7 territory, the home of the Blackfoots, the Tina, Stoney Nakoda, and Area 3 Métis Nation. And so I am an elder in the Treaty 7 territory. I'm accepted as an elder there. And I'm also an elder in my territory of Treaty 6. And so I'm also a psychotherapist. My husband calls me a psychotherapist. So I'm known as the wellness elder in my community because I can speak from a parallel perspective, both from an Indigenous worldview as well as a Western worldview. So I'm very honored to come to you today and present a little bit about trauma and Indigenous people. And the way I teach it is very grassroots. I could speak to you in a very clinical way, but I'm going to speak to you in a very down-to-earth, grassroots way, so that if you're not coming from a brain or a neuroscience background, you're going to understand this just fine. And the reason I say that is when I teach about trauma and who we are as Indigenous people and what happened, not what's wrong with us, that piece, that awareness piece, I want you to share it with your Indigenous clients, because many of my people are not aware that the behaviors that they are faced with every day, the things that are happening around them every day are not normal. They've been normalized by our people, but they are not normal. And most of my people do not know that. And when I say my people, I'm talking about Indigenous people. And I'm talking about all of us too, because we have to recognize that we're human beings, and all human beings' brains grow in exactly the same way. All living things their brains react in exactly the same way to trauma. So we're not on our own here. In fact, When I look around the world and I see what's happening all around us, and I see so much anger, I see so much anxiety and so much depression, those are not normal behaviors. And I know you would say, of course they're not, but really they are not normal behaviors. Yet we see them all over the world. They're very childlike behaviors, and often we can't control those behaviors. And so I would tell you this, and I have these discussions a lot with people who are not Indigenous, that we are all coming from earth-based teachings somewhere. And I'm going to just share my screen. Someone asked if I'm sharing my PowerPoint. No, I am not. My PowerPoint is just words. And from an Indigenous perspective, if you don't understand the spiritual components of what I'm teaching, that is why I don't let them go out there into the public. And a lot of what I'm speaking to you about today is my own copyrighted work, and very culturally focused, and I can't share those things with you. So hopefully you will understand what I'm saying and maybe be able to impart it elsewhere. But let me just go into my PowerPoint right now and share this with you. Um, so what I've been talking about, I think the biggest issue that we have coming from a Western world and an Indigenous world is that we tend to call ourselves settlers or immigrants or refugees, whatever it might be. But the bottom line is that we are all human beings, and we have to look at the similarities that we have as well, or we're never going to do this together. If we really want to figure out how are we going to work together to create the ability for equitable practice and support, we have to see ourselves very similar, not so different. And so we have to recognize that no matter who we are and where we've come from, all of us as human beings have come from earth-based teachings somewhere. It might have been 1,000 years ago. But we've all come from trauma somewhere as well. So we've all been colonized, all of us. In fact, many of your own ancestors, if you're not Indigenous, came here to flee the trauma that they were experiencing. And so we recognize that all human beings on Earth at this point have been colonized at least once. Most people have been colonized multiple times. Indigenous people have been colonized really only twice by the same people a couple of times, but French and English primarily. And colonization has only been part of our history for several hundred years. And most people that have come to Canada, trauma and colonization took place over many, many hundreds of years. So we have to recognize we do have similar things in common. And the reason I'm mentioning this is for a very important reason. When we know that trauma affects us in such chaotic ways in our brain, we have to recognize that trauma is also passed down to us. So many of us who are not Indigenous, perhaps, might be experiencing strange behaviors in your own environment of anger, anxiety, and depression, because those three behaviors are associated with trauma. They are not normal. We shouldn't have anger, anxiety, and depression unless we're in danger. Oh, yes, some people might have them because they do have other mental health issues, but the majority of people that I look at the world and see what's happening now, that the chaos out there, the anger, the sadness, what I see out there, I'm seeing trauma. And yes, I know COVID is here. COVID has put us right into our fear brain, which is the same place that trauma resides. So a lot of us are experiencing things we've never experienced before: anger, anxiety, and depression, and all the subtypes that go with that. And I'll explain that in just a moment. But please know that when we perceive danger or fear, we don't have to give ourselves anything. Something happens automatically. It is called survivor brain. It never shuts off. It is always there to protect us in case we're in a dangerous situation. So we all have these things. We're human beings. And the Indigenous people of Canada are still so close to our original Indigenous roots. It's important to understand that we have to be able to support Indigenous people so that the culture and the understanding and the relationship between Mother Earth and human beings cannot be severed. But we see this happening all around us. So my grandmother who is Cree, Ethel Bear is her name, was her name, and she used to tell me a story, a creation story, which might help put this in perspective a little bit more for you. All of us have creation stories. This one has kind of a Christian connotation or underpinning because that's where she came from. But this is the story I wanted to tell you so you understand how important being connected to the earth is, and how important being holistic is, and how important healing is from different perspectives. Because how we are taught how to work with trauma when we go to university, and I'm one of those people, doesn't come close to working with Indigenous people, doesn't come close to working with people who have multiple traumas. It doesn't come close to helping Indigenous people, even new Canadians. And so I have a lot of clients in my life who are new Canadians and refugees who can't find what they need to heal the trauma that they are carrying, which is intergenerational, which is repetitive trauma within their environment since they were children. So let me tell you a little bit about this story so that you might understand where I'm going with this. So long ago, Creator created the universe, the sun and the moon and the stars, even the spaces between the stars, the trees, the water, the animals, the plants, everything in the universe Creator created and brought everything together in a circle. And that circle created Mother Earth. And Creator gave all of those things in the circle gifts of values of kindness and love and respect and honesty, and gifts of medicine to help each other, to support one another, to learn to live with one another, to understand who they are. And Creator gave all of those things in the universe spirit. And all things carry spirit from our Indigenous perspective, even the mountains, which were the first people. And they carry their spirit deep within their belly button, where we're attached to our mothers when we're born. When we're in our spirit, we cannot be controlled. When we're in our heart, we can be controlled. When we're in our head, we can be controlled. But when we are in our spirit, we cannot be controlled. When we are in our spirit, we are in a peaceful state. That is where we carry our values, our hope, our purpose, not up here. So it's very interesting to me that we live in a world where everything is about your head. And we know that our head and body very much work together. So what does trauma look like in that brain? Trauma automatically happens when we are faced with something we don't understand, especially when we're babies. And our little brains are growing so fast at that point. If we don't have that caring adult with us to keep us safe when scary things happen to us, that little child actually believes that a sound like the wind might be dangerous. And so that child perceives in their brain, without even knowing that, automatically the brain is saying, whenever you hear the wind, it's dangerous. Run, hide, fight. That's how trauma essentially gets started. So we have to recognize that when we're actually in danger, you never have to worry. It will pop up for you. You get your cortisol levels come up and you automatically pop up into your head and you go, what is that? And pretty soon we realize that it's just the wind. We go, oh, it's just the wind. And our cortisol levels come back down again. So that's essentially our natural primitive brain taking care of us in the face of danger. It is primitive because it was there when human beings and all things first came to this earth. So we have that natural response to fear, and we will never lose it. It'll always be there for us if we need it. So we know that as an Indigenous human being, that we are 4-dimensional beings. What I mean by that is that we are spiritual, emotional, physical, and cognitive beings. A lot of people I tell this to say, yeah, aren't we all as human beings? Yes, we are all that, 4-dimensional. What happens in colonization? Now I'm referring to all of us. If you think about your ancestral lineage and where people are coming from, I can guarantee that somewhere way back in your lineage, someone experienced trauma. Maybe it was war. Maybe they were refugees. Maybe they lost their land. Maybe who knows? There are multiple reasons why we carry trauma. So so when I talk about colonization, and we know that we've all been colonized at some point in our lives, what did that look like initially? Well, colonization is much bigger than what I'm going to tell you, but I'm going to talk to you about the wellness perspective. Where did trauma originate? So when we are colonized, it is not the human beings that are adults that are colonized. The adults fight. It's the children who become colonized. And children are raised in their environments with love and kindness and respect, and their skills are developed in such a way that they know that they're there and they're important as anybody else. All of those good things happen. All of a sudden, colonization happens, where someone comes in to try to find your resources or take over your land or whatever it might be. It's been going on since the beginning of time. And those new people that are coming there now have these little children who are frightened about what has happened, and they say, this is the way it is now. Somebody else is better than you. Somebody knows more than you. You have to ask for this. You have to do this. You have to do this. So children start to become traumatized at a very early age. And their brains are in trauma because they have witnessed what has happened. They really get confused very quickly. And what happens is that there is a new order and way of being. And whatever was part of who you were before now becomes pushed aside and almost demonized in many ways. And those little children, the first thing that happens is that their spirit is pulled away from them. So our spirit, which is in our belly button, excuse me, and everybody, try and breathe into your belly button. This is not spirit. Your spirit is found in your belly button. So we know that when Creator was creating that universe and brought the human beings amidst Mother Earth and all of those things, the only thing that was different about us and everything else in the universe is that the human beings were the only species on Earth that forget who they are from time to time. And the only way we can remember who we are is to go back to Mother Earth. So when we pray, when we smudge, when we breathe, when we acknowledge Mother Earth, when we gather medicines, when we smudge, and we smudge at the beginning of everything that we do here in Alberta. I'm not sure that you do in Ontario, but I know that you do acknowledge that, and you do the land acknowledgements, and you probably do smudge as well. Well, smudge is simply the way of us taking that breath into our spirit. And because you pick that medicine in the right way, you don't pull it by the roots. When we pull the medicines from the roots, they go into trauma, just like pulling children from the roots. And we know from botanists who will tell us the evidence around that is when they are testing what the elements are in those plants, when they get them back to where they're going to test them again, they find that the elements and the medicines that they are initially tested when the plant was growing in the ground, surrounded by its family, because all things grow in families. What happens is 50% of the medicines are no longer viable. So we mimic Mother Earth. Everything we do, we mimic Mother Earth because Mother Earth never forgets who she is. So when we forget who we are, we have the behaviors, anger, anxiety, and depression. And that's up in our head. So when we're colonized, the way that we would stay in our spirit is by breathing, doing ceremonies, smudging, walking, hunting, being with animals, swimming. Today, you might do things like yoga or mindfulness or play basketball or listen to music or whatever that might be. So when I'm referring to spirit, I'm referring to that place within us, deep within our belly buttons, that zone that we're in. When we're in that zone, we feel safe. When we're in that zone, we are in control. So during colonization, when you have that taken away from you and people say you are no longer who you are, somebody is better than you, somebody knows more than you do. The greatest travesty is that we don't have a way of going into a resting brain state. So when I use the term spirit, the parallel word for spirit is resting brain state. So what happens simultaneously to us when we get down into our belly button in our spirit is that we are able to get out of our trauma brain and drop into our prefrontal cortex, which is where we think. We don't think back here. This is where where our emotions are, where our senses are, with all of those things. This is where we think, our prefrontal cortex. This is how we think, solve problems, build relationships, have working memory, all those things important to learning, to understanding, to moving forward in our lives and building relationships. So when you are working with people who have trauma, who don't understand who you are, they don't trust you, you cannot start with the cognitive. In the Western world, we are taught about cognitive behavioral therapy, excellent therapy, if you can think. But when you have trauma, you cannot think. And this is one of the most important things I'm going to tell you right now, because you all know this. We all learn this at university or wherever we're going, and we learn that. What do you have to do first? Before you begin, you have to ground that person, stabilize that person. Those are other terms for spirit, coming into spirit. But they don't tell you necessarily that when you calm people down, there's a reason for this, and get them into their spirit. They also drop into their prefrontal cortex, so they'll hear you. They can think. They can solve problems. They can't until you get them into their belly button. So when you're colonized and that is taken away from you, it is very difficult to be able to think, to learn, to be happy, to be joyful, to have hope, to have all of those things. Because when someone takes that from you, you go into your trauma brain, which is here in the midbrain. And what happens in the survival brain, the trauma brain, is fight, flee, or freeze. And you're always ready to do one of those things. If you've had repetitive trauma in your life, I'm not talking about a one-time trauma event. When you've had repetitive trauma in your life, like that colonization, and now you're doing this and you have to do this, and they take all of those things away from you, then you will stay in your trauma brain until you heal. So trauma is treatable. That is the bottom line. Trauma is treatable, and you can heal trauma at any point in your life, but you're not going to do it through cognitive behavioral therapy first. Cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the last things that you have to do when you're working with people. Even if they're sitting in front of you and you're not a counselor or a doctor, how do you engage somebody in trauma? You won't know. They don't have a sign that says I'm in trauma. They look as total normal as anyone else, but it's what's happening in their brain. And many times when you have trauma, it becomes so normalized, you just think that that is normal. You're not going to tell people this is how I feel. Because in colonization, the second thing that happens to us as human beings is somebody tells you, don't cry, suck it up, don't tell anyone, don't get over it. So the second dimension that is taken from us as human beings is our emotions. And our emotions are creators' antibiotics. We have to feel in order to heal. Wow. Now, all of a sudden, as a child, you have no sense of who you are anymore, because who you are comes from your spirit. That's your values. We have no way of telling people how we're feeling. And over time, without a resolution to your trauma, it keeps building and building and building. And pretty soon, all you know is somebody else is better than me, and there's something wrong with me. And so you see people, even when they're 75 years old, who have trauma. They might have figured out how to work through a lot of things in their lives, but they're still behaving with anger, anxiety, and depression as a way to react to things in their environment. And they often pass it on to you. We know that that it is important when we're working with people not to start from what is wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with us. We have to start with who are Indigenous people. Indigenous people are people that are very connected to the earth, very connected to love and kindness and sharing with one another, and all being responsible for those children and raising them with love and culture, protection. What happened is colonization. Part of colonization are the residential schools. Part of colonization was removing people and sending them to reservations or refugee camps, if you look at New Canadians and refugees and so forth. What happens is that trauma, because you're living in an environment where you don't know who you are anymore, and there's a lot of fear around you, and it never goes away. Every new situation, especially if you're a child, you don't have a lot of neural connectors that are about positive experiences. If you live in an environment where all you've had are negative experiences and seen only negative coping abilities, that's all you know. Your brain only knows what you know. It's not going to change unless you change it. So when I use this theory of change, I use it in everything. I teach at the University of Calgary. I use this even when I'm teaching. Who are you? What happened in your life to get you where you are today? What is going on? How are you going to heal? And where are you going now? And it's a very, very simple theory of change. It really isn't a theory anymore because we've been doing it for so long. We get the same result, which is resilience every time. I'm talking about long-term resilience because I don't measure resilience as for a short time. That's adaptability. I look at how are you in a year and where have you gone since then? And when I see that, to me, that is resilience. But I think a lot of times we measure adaptability. We're not measuring resilience in our programs. So this is what it looks like if you're coming from an Indigenous worldview. What does this look like? This looks like how it is in your environment when you're coming from a really healthy environment where you have a caring adult around you who nurtures you and teaches you and loves you, where you have people around you that say what they mean and don't change that. They don't say one thing and do the opposite. And if you're living in an environment like that, we know that you're going to grow into adults with a strong self-concept. You're going to be independent and you're going to have a lot of balance and you're going to be a successful human being. And each one of those steps of our lives, of course, help us to move to a different place. And we are developing all kinds of healthy brains because the experiences around us are healthy. So if you don't have healthy, positive experiences in your life, you're not going to have healthy coping methods. We have to have new healthy coping methods in order to change our brain. And we're the only ones that can do that. So I'm talking about neuroplasticity as well when I talk about those little babies. And I know you know a lot about this. And this I'm just going to refer to this again because we know that the brain is very plastic when you're very little, 0 to 3. Boy, oh boy, do those little brains ever learn a lot very quickly and they retain the knowledge because your brain is very plastic. It grows and it expands very quickly at a very young age. As we get older, that plasticity slows down and our brain is fully developed by the time we're 30. So they say. I would challenge that because I see huge changes with people who have trauma all their life, weren't aware they had trauma, really had a lot of issues. And finally, they get the awareness that I'm not the trauma and they start to work through it, they get better. And I start to see huge differences in their learning and they're learning quickly. So I don't think there's been a lot of research around people who have multiple or intergenerational trauma and how does their brain change when they heal that trauma, because trauma is treatable at any point in your life. The older you are though, the longer it takes, because we do know that it does take a while for our brains to remember the new things that we are learning. But once we heal, I start to see the brain change all over again. I think that we're developing new neurons, but that's not for me to say because I haven't done actual research on that. So even the researchers out there only know what they know, and we know that things change all the time. So we know that we want to be able to teach children as many positive things as we can, so that they can retain that knowledge and they learn healthy coping skills. They learn how to trust. They develop secure attachment and they learn to emotionally regulate. Now, I've been talking about the brain and how the brain grows from the very brain stem all the way into the prefrontal cortex. And so when we talk about what happens in trauma, we're talking about something, a threat or a fear that happens within our environment, we immediately get the reaction way down here. It's actually the reticulation system, and automatically, just automatically, if you hear something, or you see something, or you smell something, or you taste something, all of those senses are in the midbrain, the limbic system, and that's where our survivor brain is. So if you can think about human beings at the beginning of time, where there wasn't any technology, we just lived together in close family groups. We protected each other. How did we know about danger? Through our senses. What do I see? What do I smell? What do I taste? What do I hear? What do I feel? And those senses determine whether we're in danger or not. They would be very, very hyper senses, because that's how we would protect ourselves. We would hear so much more acutely than we do now. We would smell so much more acutely than we do now. We would know the smells of what is a bear and what isn't, and what's dangerous and what isn't. And as soon as we smell those things, or hear those sounds, or see something in the distance, or taste something, maybe we're tasting smoke is almost in the air or something like that, or we feel the vibration of something coming towards us, that would be the only way we could determine what was happening in our environment. And so immediately we would react by the senses. So it's the senses that tell us when we are in danger. And all of us have the same reaction to fear, by what we smell, taste, see, hear, all of those pieces. So what happens when, say we smell smoke, and we think, where's that smoke coming from? Automatically, we're already up in our head. We're up in this part of our body. And how we get there partially is through the cortisol, which is a hormone or a neurotransmitter. And that cortisol is what wakes us up in the morning, and we get up, the cortisol comes on, and we wake up, and we can continue on during the day. But our cortisol isn't supposed to stay up here all day. It's supposed to come, you get up and then you sit down and you do something, your cortisol levels are supposed to come up and down in your body throughout the day. Wouldn't that be nice? I know that all of us are so busy, sometimes we never have a moment to sit down. Not good, because your cortisol levels in your body are going to dysfunction after a while too. And you won't be able to sleep. You'll start to see all kinds of things happening to you, because you're not taking that time to come down into your spirit, right? Just having a cup of tea, right? Or going for a walk helps to regulate the cortisol levels. So the cortisol is associated with threat, or for being on guard and awake and moving forward in the day. So your cortisol levels come up when you sense something that might be fearful to you, because of what you smell, hear, taste, see, all of those pieces, right? And so when somebody is first faced with that trauma, it gives you the ability to fight, flee, and freeze. Oops, what happened to my screen here? There we go. So fight, flee, or freeze is what is going to happen. So what does that look like in your brain? So starting at the brainstem, say you're a little baby. You don't have a lot of coping methods. You hear a loud noise. The alarm immediately sounds right here in your brainstem. It immediately, simultaneously moves up into your midbrain. Your midbrain is where is your survivor brain. That is also where your feelings and your emotions are ready to process. I smell, or I hear. So in this case, if you heard a loud noise, immediately your limbic system is saying, danger, what is that? And you will see I have a squiggly line up here. I didn't do that because I made a mistake. I did that to show you exactly how your brain reacts to trauma. So when you're in trauma, you've heard a loud noise, right? The cortisol comes up because it makes you alert. The adrenaline pumps in your arms and legs. That's another hormone. So you can run if you need to, because that loud noise, you don't know what it is right away. What is that? You're right in your midbrain where your survivor brain is. Fight, flee, or freeze. The cortisol and the adrenaline is helping you prepare to do one of those three things: run, hide, or fight. So what happens is, we know that your brain literally blocks you from getting into your prefrontal cortex. All of the energy in your brain is going into your survivor brain in case you are in danger. So you can't get into your prefrontal cortex. You can't think. All you can do is react. And then all of a sudden you go, oh, just the wind. And what happens automatically is that the cortisol level comes down. And when it comes down, your brain goes, oh, you're not in danger. And you drop right into your prefrontal cortex. Now you're back in your spirit. It doesn't happen until you calm down. And then now you can think. So when you're looking with, if you're working with people that have had a critical incident, say there's been major floods, they've lost their homes, they don't know where their children are, they are in their trauma brain. They are in fear. They can't get out of there until they know that there is hope, that they know that they're okay, and they're not okay. So we don't do counseling with people that are in that state. Instead, we sit down and say, here's a blanket. Let's just, here's the drink of water. Would you like me to get you a cup of coffee? And what we're doing is we're bringing people down into their spirit, because we can't ask them questions at that point. If we say to them, where do you live? What's your husband's name? They're going to try and get into their prefrontal cortex. You will notice people in trauma, when you ask questions, they're trying to think about what you're asking them. They're trying to hear you. That is a sure sign that they're not safe in your environment. Because when they're not answering you and they're kind of thinking, and then all of a sudden, well, they might give you an answer that might not be the right one, but all of a sudden they've been able to think about something. They've been able to force themselves to do that. That is what people with trauma are like every day, unless it's resolved. They have no control over that squiggly little line here, because to them, they have unresolved trauma. No one has ever been able to support them in this. Nobody has ever been able to help them with this, because in many cases, trauma inventories aren't even done in healthcare. When you hear the history of people, surely you can determine if trauma might be the first consideration. And trauma is treatable, and you can work on the trauma. So when you are at a resting brain state in your spirit, it's just the wind. What happens is that automatically you drop right into your prefrontal cortex. You don't have to force yourself to do that. It does it automatically. So how do we get there? How does trauma actually manifest itself in such a way that we actually get there? Not everybody can develop trauma. A lot of times, what you will see is that you have just severe toxic stress. But toxic stress leads to trauma. So we have positive stress all the time. Our cortisol floods through us. Oh yeah, I'm in a new environment. You go, oh yeah, okay, I'm okay. Then tolerable stress, which takes a little bit longer to get rid of because it stays with you for a long time. The thoughts, the feelings, all of those things. Then the third thing is toxic stress, which is prolonged, repetitive stress in your life. Maybe it's abuse or neglect or abandonment or whatever that might look like. And your body's stress response system can't turn off. When you are in trauma all the time, which I see every day, because people don't know they're in trauma and people don't know how to help people in trauma, their cortisol level has been up all the time. They're not sleeping. You'll see children in school that are under such trauma in their life, such stress, that the cortisol levels never come down. And when they finally do, They don't come down till 2 or 3 in the morning. And when you have to get that child up to go to school, they're in their sleep cycle. They're in, so we have parasympathetic and sympathetic systems, right? They're in their sleep cycle and they can't get up and they're tired and all that. Their sleep cycles become totally mixed up. When you're an adult, the same thing happens. You don't know that you have that trauma in your brain still. You don't know why you're angry all the time, just because you're annoyed. You don't know all of those things. It just happens. So I'm not going to talk about that right now. So epigenetics. I want to talk to you about epigenetics because this is something that is relatively new in the last 20 years. Epigenetics is the science that tells us that not only do we receive the genetics from our ancestors, we also receive the memories and behaviors from our ancestors. And what happens in our environment also plays a role in how we are, how we behave, how we react. So what happens in our environment, if you were with parents who've had trauma in their lives, what happens in that environment is that they might get angry at you. That's their way of coping with trauma, because we pick one of those things more predominantly: anger, anxiety, or depression. Maybe they get angry over nothing. Something falls and what are you doing? They start to yell and you think, my God, what kind of behavior is that? You become terrified of that person, right? Because they have this kind of anger that is so explosive they can't control it. Now, that is part of trauma. If you have unresolved trauma, your brain is still stuck in trauma. And even the slightest thing that annoys you or bothers you will create a reaction of either anger, anxiety, and depression. And we know that maybe there's nothing happening in our environment. Maybe we're living in a wonderful environment. But if there has been trauma in prior ancestral generations, they can pass that trauma down to us too. They also pass down good things, not just bad things. But sometimes I have people that come to me and say, I don't know why I have so much anger. I'm so angry. I cannot control my anger. There's nobody else in my family that has anger. And when I start to talk to them about where they've come from, I find out that, the grandparents came from refugee camps and whatever. And so it is, I can see that maybe, and they would say, yeah, grandpa was really an angry person, right? And we pass our behaviors onto our children. So that is why we're seeing this repetitive trauma in our life today. Because if that's all you know, that's all you can do. And this is why it is so important for people to have, Indigenous people especially, to have the awareness that their anger, anxiety, and depression is coming from trauma. And when you're not in danger, you shouldn't have those behaviors. None of us. So I'm going to go on here. So what does that look like? This is essentially what it looks like in our environment when we see how neglect at a very early age leads to fear and blame and shame and anger and apathy, eventually attachment, trauma, loss, maybe addictions, violence, and survivor brain. So trauma is an experience associated with a previous threat. It doesn't have to be an immediate one. If you have a memory of a previous threat and how you coped with it was through your anger and you've never resolved it, then every time there is some kind of an alarm, something new, something you hear, something that you don't understand, you may react with fight, flee, freeze, because you're still in your survivor brain: anger, anxiety, and depression. So that's what it looks like. Toxic stress leads to trauma. You have to have toxic stress on an ongoing, repetitive way. Will lead to trauma, and you will not be able to get into your prefrontal cortex to think. So what do we do? What do we do? We know that if trauma has happened to you in your past and it's unresolved, it will be with you in your present and it will be with you in the future unless you resolve it. And it can be healed at any time. So the survivor brain, fight, flee, freeze, is anger, anxiety, and depression. We cannot think. So I don't know why we ask all of those questions and get people to fill in all kinds of forms the first day they see you, because what you're doing is you're not creating relationship, that's for sure. You're not creating safety. They may never come back. They may never form that relationship with you again. They have a very difficult time to even hear you in that room because they're not in their spirit. So how do we heal this? We know that Indigenous people need to have a strong cultural identity for them to be resilient. It's one of the few evidence-based things we have seen that shows that, okay? We know that within our environments, we need to look at intergenerational trauma-informed practice. It's different than trauma-informed practice, by the way. It really requires you understanding what I'm telling you today so that you know when people react to you with anger. So say if you're in a school and a child gets suspended, 2 children get suspended for fighting on the playground, and you send them home, which is a natural response for the consequences. And a mom comes into your office the next morning and she's fuming and she says, "How dare you treat my child like this?" What is that? That's not a normal behavior. She probably has trauma and she's learned to fight and protect her children. And the slightest little acknowledgement that her child might have done something wrong is so awful for her, she can't look at that. Instead, it must be your fault. So she's using that blame. And she's acting like a child or an adolescent because we stop growing at the first trauma. So the age we are at the first trauma we have, our emotions stop growing. So we become emotionally a 4-year-old or emotionally a 12-year-old or whatever it might be. So just to give you an idea about what I mean by this is all human beings have probably had trauma in their life passed down to them. Epigenetics gets passed down for generations, 7 generations. They say they did studies with rats to determine that genetics can be passed down to you, so can memories and behaviors. And what happens in the environment is how you learn. That gets passed down to your offspring and so forth. So in the reality is that probably all of us have been traumatized at least once. Probably all of us have had ancestors that had repetitive trauma because of where they were coming from. And we didn't learn to resolve that fight, flee, freeze, even coming to Canada or going or resolving trauma in another generation. We cannot resolve the trauma until we're aware that the trauma cannot be resolved until you identify that it's there. I have anger. You know, when I do domestic violence courses, for example, I don't tell people that they need to control their anger because they can't. I have to make them aware of why they might have that anger, how it got passed down to them. And the fact that they can, once they're aware of that, you have to be aware of something before you can change it. And I see amazing changes with my clients just with that awareness. That is why I'm telling you this from a grassroots perspective, because I want you to be able to tell your clients, you know, something happened. There's nothing wrong with you. And it was passed down to you. And maybe not in this generation. It came from somewhere else. Just having that knowledge is healing. We can't change things we're not aware of. We grow up being raised by parents, and we think that's how to raise our own children. And we can change it when we know that that's not normal. So please know that trauma is treatable at any stage, but we can carry trauma for the rest of our life. And we can only do that through the awareness and then healing. So how do we heal? Awareness. We have to know why we behave the way we do. What happened, not what is wrong with us. We want to be able to create holistic programs so we connect people to their spirit. So we connect people to their emotions, our emotions, our creators, antibiotics. Remember that. So when I told you the story about when something happens to us at a certain age, we stop growing emotionally, what does that look like? I'm going to use an example. I don't watch the news very often, but how could we not lately, right? All of the things going on in the States, all of the things that are going on about COVID. So I do watch news now because I'm interested in what's happening now. And I was very curious about Trump. And so I said to my husband one day, what happened to Trump at 12? And my husband, who knows all about these things, he said to me, he went to military academy at 12. His father rejected him and he just wanted his father's attention so much. And I went, ah. Now, I'm very much a behavioralist. By the way people react, I can tell what age they were when they had trauma. So Trump isn't Indigenous. He's a human being. And when he went off to a military academy at 12, well, military academy isn't always the kindest place to be. It's very carceral in many ways. And you have to learn to survive. And going there and be fearful of someone yelling at you and shaking their finger at you and telling you you will do what I tell you must be a terrifying thing for anyone. Certainly a 12-year-old boy. And so even in that instance, you're going to go into trauma and you're going to fight, flee, freeze. Anger, anxiety, or depression. You're either going to just do what you're told, or you're going to stand up to someone, or you're going to leave perhaps because it's not going to work for you, right? Fight, flee, freeze. Well, obviously, Trump learned to fight because one of the subtypes that are attached to anger is bullying. And Trump learned to be a bully. And that's very evident in how he behaves. And he behaves like a 12-year-old boy. I couldn't believe it when I saw that. Unresolved trauma. But why would he give that up? It worked for him. So people aren't going to give up their behaviors unless it works for them to give it up. Sometimes it's our children that make us change. Sometimes we just get so overwhelmed. We think, I got to change this. And we can change our behavior anytime when we know that our behavior is formed. It's given to us within our family of origin or from our ancestral lineage. And we can change it at any time. Our brain is not going to change for us. So when we're working with Indigenous people, we have to use cultural resources because our cultural resources are familiar to us, even if we've never had culture. Do you know what? I have people sometimes say, oh, well, I have Indigenous people, but they've never been involved with their culture. They don't want to smudge. Well, it's because they don't know how. It's our responsibility to bring in elders and natural supports to teach children and adults how to smudge. I work with a women's group, women who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and more, who are Indigenous and who have never, ever done anything Indigenous. They've lived in the urban areas all their lives. And they're like, my God, when we smudge, they cry. And they say, why am I crying? You're crying because there's the memory, and it's such a comforting memory to you. You're crying tears of joy. You come back to yourself. So we work with cultural healing. And in our practices, we have to recognize if you're working with Indigenous people, you don't have a right to teach cultural ways of knowing. You don't have a right to teach smudge. But you should sure have somebody come in and do that to show you and to show the people that in your agency and to really offer teachings about Indigenous ways of knowing. And be aware of the triggers that are arising just by using words. I had a terrible experience just recently with somebody who was a trained social worker, and I'm a social worker, so I teach social work, who compared Indigenous people as hybridization. My God, a little too much like assimilation. Well, literally within her workplace, there was such anger and rage that she lost her position just like that. And she didn't know why. And I said, the language is so powerful. Hybridization, the literal meaning is bringing two together so they're assimilated and become one. That is not who Indigenous people are, and that's not what we're doing. We must walk parallel paths. When we offer exams, maybe we offer the ability for them to do those exams orally, because oral knowledge is how we transmit our knowledge. There are many different ways of working in that way. So take a deep breath. I want to just take you back for a moment, because I'm almost out of time. I want to take you back for a moment to spirituality in your belly button. So, because a lot of people say, well, we start with that. I don't start with, hi, how are you? Okay, I want you to fill in. I'd be like, I'm up in my brain. And right away, I'm in the midbrain. I'm going, oh my God, who is this person? Where is the door? And that's how people react when they have trauma. You have to be very careful. So instead, you might say, hi, how are you? My name is Kerrie. Come on in. Can I get you a drink of water? Do you need anything before we begin? So, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and where I come from. Tell me a little bit about yourself, right? So we have to be able to engage with our clients. And I know you do this, most of you. So please know that you're doing such a respectful way by creating a relationship first. You have to create a relationship. And in that relationship, the people that you are speaking to or you are helping will slowly come down into their spirit. And now they can hear you. Now they can solve problems. Now they can tell you what you need to know. I'm sure that many of the assessments that I used to do in parenting assessments, I always do them. I talk to my clients. I never put them in a room to have them do anything, because I recognize that they're so traumatized when they come to see me that they're just going to check things off. They're not going to think. They can't get into the prefrontal cortex. So what I do is I build that relationship, and then I ask them the questions. And through the answer, I know that they don't understand it. And then I can say, well, what this question is asking is this. Because I see so many people misdiagnosed who are Indigenous, so many. I see so many Indigenous people misdiagnosed with clinical depression or chronic anxiety or many other things, when the reality of it is, if you ask the right questions in a good way, you say, well, what's going on in, tell me about your life and why you're here today, or whatever that might be. I never say what's wrong with you, what's bothering you, because those infer a deficit. I'm trying to get someone back to the understanding of the environment, what's happening around you, to make you feel the way you do. By the way, Indigenous people will feel before they think. So even asking questions, what do you think? I change all my questions. How do you feel about this? And when I ask that question in that way, you're going to get a much clearer understanding of who that individual is. Much clearer, because they are going to be tell you how they feel. They might not be able to get into the prefrontal cortex yet, but they can tell you how they feel about that question. Because our body gives us the answers when our head can't. And there's an exercise I could do with you about that. I don't think we'll have time, but please remember that people with trauma can't think unless you get them into their spirit. So here's a story for you. What do I mean when I'm talking about spirit? I was up north in northern Alberta, working with a school division there, and teaching them all about Indigenous people and trauma, because most of their students were Indigenous. And I was teaching it to the staff, and the staff were all around me, and most of them had lived in the community for a very long time. They were wonderful human beings, kind, just wonderful. They had great relationships with their students, but they were having a lot of difficulties trying to get those kids in high school, particularly, to learn what they need to learn. And that's one of the reasons why they called me. And so I was telling the story about trauma like I am to you, and about coming into spirit and how you do that. And there was one teacher who was sitting there, and he was smiling at me the whole time. And at the end, he said, "You know what, Kerrie? I have to tell you this story." He said, "Because I do something with my kids, but I had no idea what I was doing until just now." He said, "Let me tell you this story." He said, "I'm the math teacher, and I teach grade 10 math after lunch. Impossible to do in the best of times." But he said, "My kids are coming into me. They're tired. They're hungry. Some of them haven't eaten. They're done. They've been there all morning and they're just done. They want to get out of there." And he said, "They're all over the place. They don't like math, most of them, because it requires a lot of thinking." And he said, "Up to this point, I didn't know why they were having trouble. They can't get into their prefrontal cortex to do math concepts." And I said, "You're right." And he said, "So one day I just got sick of it." He said, "So I decided I was going to try something." And he said, "My kids trust me a lot. I've known a lot of them for a lot of years." And he said, "So I decided I was going to go get a book out of the library, and I was going to read to them 15 minutes, not the whole class." He said, "So I got Tom Sawyer." He said, "I've never read it myself. I heard it was a great classic." He said, "So I brought it into my grade 10 class." He says, "I'm sitting out in front of them. I'm not behind my desk." And he said, "I said to all my students, all right, everybody, get out of your desks. Sit in a circle. Lie down if you want. I don't care. Fall asleep if you want. Doesn't matter." And his students were like, "Mr. Smith, have you lost it?" Right? They were joking around with him. And he said, "No, just trust me." Right? So they all came together, sat down, laid down, whatever it looked like. And he opened his book and he started to read Tom Sawyer. Now, this man has a wonderful voice. When he speaks, it lulls you to sleep. He's amazing. And he could hear some of the kids snoring. And he read for 15 minutes, closed up the book, and he said, "Okay, everybody, get up, get into your desks. Now we're going to do math." And he knew he only had about 15 minutes before they would start to react to everything around them. So it got better over time, because every day they came, he read a little bit more. And eventually they were choosing the books for him to read. And they got up in their desk, they sat down. He would present one concept, that was it. And he knew he had 15 minutes to get their attention. But he didn't know why until I spoke about, you can't think and get into your prefrontal cortex until you're in your spirit first. And so what he was doing by reading to them is he was getting them totally down into that spirit, resting brain state. And once they were there, they could think, they could solve problems. And at the end of the year, his students had the highest marks in the district. And his principal said to him, "What are you doing, Charlie? You need to teach us how you're doing this." Now, he had a fairly new principal, and one he didn't think he trusted that well. So he just said to him, "I'm teaching math." The other teachers in the school knew what he was doing, but he was afraid to say it, because he was afraid that the teacher would say to him, "You can't do that. You need to teach math." So getting into your spirit, you can do it in many different ways. But in order to learn, to think, to hear, to change, you have to be in your spirit first, however that looks for you. So please remember that when you are working with people in trauma, especially Indigenous people, even new Canadians. This works for them too, as much as it works for anyone else. So just another thing that I wanted to speak to you about was that trauma is a very difficult thing, because it causes all kinds of things in the body as well. So people that have trauma often have other illnesses because of the cortisol levels in your body, right? And so it is important that all of you because all of you could be suffering toxic stress too. Find what you need to do in your life every day to come down in your spirit, even if it's holding your cat or your baby or walking when you get home from work. You're probably working out of your home, but get up and walk with your kids. Listen to some music, close the door. What I do, I have to close everyone away from me. So I close my door and I do what I need to do. Sometimes I watch something mindless on TV, like Little House on the Prairie, because it's really good to know that some people do have those beautiful lives, right? Despite the trauma that they're experiencing. I'm always in Little House on the Prairie. If you're not familiar with that, that's a very, very old series. And it's really about trauma and overcoming trauma and how they do it so well because they live with love and kindness and respect. And that really is the bottom line. So I will stop there and open it up for any questions that you might have at this point. I've given you but a little bit of what trauma is, intergenerational trauma is, and how you have to be in spirit to really start to work with it. Please remember that if you don't see a trauma inventory coming across your desk, and you know that the people you're working with are coming from a lot of trauma, please don't believe what you're reading, because I see so many people misdiagnosed, honestly. If you're diagnosed, well, the common things I see people diagnosed with is borderline personality disorder and bipolar. So if you have a personality disorder, you're going to have it for the rest of your life, even though you can have treatment for it. And you will learn how to deal with it at a certain point. But if you're coming from trauma and your trauma is unresolved, you're not going to be able to get better. Remember that cognitive behavioral therapy is a great therapy if you can think, but it isn't the first thing that you do. You have to build relationships. You have to be able to really make people feel safe. And in order to create a new neural connection that is positive, it has to be repetitive. And you have to be successful at it. If you do things that you're not successful at it, you're not going to change your brain. What do I mean by this? I'm going to give you a quick understanding of this. So if I want to change something about myself, I'm not going to try and change what I'm trying to change. Does that make sense to you? So if I'm trying to lose weight, I'm not going to go on a diet. Because if I go on a diet, I'm setting myself up for failure, because my brain doesn't want to go on a diet. So what I have to do is do something different that I know I can be successful at, so that when I come back to say, yeah, today I don't want that chocolate, my brain will go, oh, okay. But my brain won't do that until I give my brain something new. So this is something all of you can do if you're trying to change a behavior. So, and you have to do it by yourself, not with other people. Something simple. So if I want to change my brain, so my brain knows I can do something else, I might do something I've never done before. So it's a challenge to me because I don't know what to expect, right? Something not too difficult, like going to Starbucks. And you might say to me, what's fearful about that? Well, when I go to Starbucks with friends of mine, I order coffee. That's it. Why? Because that big board that says you can add this and you can add this and you can do this and you can have that is too fearful for me. I don't know what it is, and I'm afraid to ask what it is, just because of where I come from. And I'm worried that I'm going to hold up the line behind me and then people are going to be upset with me. So I've never done that. But if I were to go into Starbucks tomorrow and look at that board and say, I'm going to have, well, what is that? And what is that? And what is that? Okay, I'm going to have that with that. And if I order that, something different, and I sit down and I drink that, my brain has just changed. That's how simple. You have to take a risk, a positive risk that you can be successful at before you will change your brain. So don't give kids math homework when they're having trouble with math. Give them something they can accomplish and then come at it the next day when the brain has formed a new neural connection, positive. It takes 1 second, excuse me, 1 second for negative experiences to go from short-term to long-term. It takes 12 seconds for positive experiences to go from short-term to long-term. So you have to do them longer and you have to repeat them before you have a new connection that is long-term, that will give you a positive way to deal with things. So I'll end there. Are there any questions from any of you?
Hi, Kerrie. Of course, now just that I've unmuted, my kitty cat has decided she snuck into the room and likes to sing her song. So I
Well, that's
apologize
okay.
if you hear her. Oh my goodness. Okay, my brain is going lots of places. We'll let people think for a minute if they have questions. I've seen lots of affirmation and gratitude in the chat, but I invite everybody to think for a moment if you have a question for Kerrie. What comes to my mind? Well, a couple of things really stuck out, and you've got me thinking about this whole adaptability versus resilience piece, and wondering how much I might have fallen into that trap of people I work with, where sort of thinking adaptability was resilience. So if you felt compelled to speak about that a little bit more, or also many of us run groups with parents and families, and your wisdom of inviting people into a resting brain space. Do you have any thoughts around, or maybe suggestions how in a group kind of situation where we might be successful in inviting our participants into that resting brain space? So those were two areas that if you have further thoughts on, we would welcome them.
So I think what you're saying is, if you're working with a group, how do you get them into their resting brain state altogether, right?
Yeah.
So you can do almost anything. And what schools are doing in Calgary now that I'm working with is that they are recognizing that if you start in a good way, your outcomes are going to be much better.
Okay.
So they are trying different things in their circles at school. At the beginning of school, they several of the schools all meet together on Zoom, right? So they say, okay, today I'm going to give you a poem. Or today we have so-and-so that's going to do a blessing in their language. Or today we're going to do some breathing and come down into our belly button and think good thoughts. So they try different sort of things because they recognize that not everything is going to work for everyone. So I think the whole idea is the intention of starting in spirit, however that looks to you. Maybe you want to play some music, right? I used to go to university classes and we had a fellow that would always have music playing with birds, right? Singing. And he would just say, close your eyes for a moment, right? And just sort of be, right? If you're working with Indigenous people in your circle, in Calgary, we always start with smudge. We have to, it's mandated now, or we don't get funding, which I think is awesome. So you might want to have an elder in that circle if you're working with Indigenous people, who begins every day with that smudge, gets them to come down into their spirit, right? Drumming is amazing. So in Calgary now, I've got different schools doing drumming. So we're on Zoom. So what we do now is we know that drumming, if you read any work by Bruce Perry, he will tell you, don't waste your time on counseling with children. It doesn't work. Well, we know that. You're throwing your money out the door. Do art therapy, do whatever else, but don't do talk therapy. And so Bruce Perry did work on drumming and how just the repetitive drumming actually reprograms your brain. So people who have trauma, children who have FASD, we're seeing amazing. I think this will be written up in the next 2 years because we haven't started yet, but we are thinking about it because we are seeing incredible changes in the brains of kids with FASD with drumming every day. It has to be repetitive though. Anything positively repetitive will eventually change what you are seeing. And we're seeing emotional regulation with children that are drumming, all kinds of things. So you can do almost anything that you want in a circle to get them in a good state. The whole point is that the facilitator must be in a resting state themselves. So I'm
Right.
going to do something which might put you all into trauma, but this is what I mean. So I'm sitting in a circle and I said, hey, everybody, how are you? Let's get going. What did that do to you?
Yeah.
Automatically,
All anxious.
you just experienced going into your trauma brain.
Yeah.
And then you came down. Well, people who have trauma never come down. They're there all the time. So instead you would say, all right, everybody, just take a breath for a minute. Let's just kind of get our bearings. Let's just check in. How is everybody today, right? I always begin with something positive, always, because when you begin with something positive, then even that group that you're with have a tendency not to go right away into that negative, right? They have to look for something positive, because the whole understanding of healing of people is to have their stories change,
Right.
right?
Right.
You don't want them to tell you the same story over and over again. The story is important, but we are our stories to some degree, but everybody changes every day. So in every circle that I do, I teach in circles at the university as well, and the school, University of Calgary, thinks that was very odd in the beginning, but they have to find a big enough classroom for me where I can fit 30 students. Right now I'm not doing it, I'm doing it by Zoom, and when we're sitting in that circle, people tell their stories, and I do debriefing at the end of everything I do. And that debriefing, I always say, so tell me what you learned today. What's an aha moment that you had? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? And in the process of doing that, no matter what has happened over the course, it might have been trauma you were talking about, right? People are able to debrief it. I never let people go home without debriefing. If I'm talking about things like domestic violence or addictions or any of those things, I make sure I have time at the end to debrief with everyone. They don't have to speak, but hearing other people debrief is also, they're part of the circle, so they become part of that healing. There are many things that you can do, but start on a positive note, always. Even if it is, let's just go around and see, if you had one word, well, how would you describe yourself today in a good way, right?
Right.
Just that tends to get them out of their trauma brain right away, because they have to feel what they're doing is they're starting to move down. They might not be quite in their spirit, right? But they're moving out of their trauma brain and say, yeah, no, I feel relaxed today, right? But getting people to breathe into their spirit every day, I do it with them. Then you know they're in their spirit right off the bat.
That actually is just a really, really wonderful advice. And I breathed with you just there, and I felt myself, because I've got those sort of wrapping up nerves going on and that kind of thing. And it's just amazing, just that one pause.
Yeah. And you asked me another question, and I can't remember what it was.
I know I threw two of them at you at once, but it was just, I guess, just understanding perhaps a little bit more what you mean about adaptability versus resilience.
Very, very important, because I've had these discussions with major researchers that are looking for resilience, and I read all of these from some of the organizations that I work with in Calgary, because I'm a cultural advisor. I read their outcomes, and they have these resilience scales and all of those pieces. And when I read through them, and I say to them, there's a lot of adaptability in your program. Now let's see where the resilience is. And they say, well, this is resilience. And I say to them, well, this is a one-time event, right? One-time event where you have those people for a short period of time. And so you can see that there is change, and they're really adapting well to what you're teaching them, and they're taking those skills to use them. But you need to ask them in 6 months where they're at. And so within my organization, they're like, what? And I say, yeah, if you want to know that this is a resiliency model, then what you need to tell the people that you are doing the outcome, the data collection at the end, You need to say, can I contact you in 6 months just to see how you're doing? It's a good practice anyway. And you might think, well, that takes a lot of time. You don't have to contact everyone.
Right, right.
Maybe you contact a few people, and if they say, oh, but here's another thing. If you saw my model at the beginning, who, what, how, where. If you're working within a program where you talk about who are you, where are you coming from, what are your teachings, what do you know, what happened to create the behaviors that you're experiencing, how do we heal that? If you go through that process, that theory of awareness, it's actually a theory of change. They will get into their where am I going all on their own. You don't have to take them there. And when somebody can say to you, and you've been trying to get them to do things, and they say to you, you know what I did last week, Kerrie? I went and I got my ID because I lost it, 6 months ago. And I say, yeah, I know. Yeah, well, I decided I just better go get it. What happened? Their brain changed. Now they have moved into not a trauma brain. They're in their prefrontal cortex. They're solving problems on their own. So we often think we need to do cognitive behavioral therapy to get people to be in their prefrontal cortex. First of all, you can't do that. Unless people are in their spirit, you're not going to get them in the prefrontal cortex. So if you get them in their spirit first, and really work with them around, let's figure out what's happening to you, how we're going to deal with this. Believe you me, they are going to be able to get into their prefrontal cortex on their own and solve their own problems without you ever asking. And the outcome of that is when you ask the dad, what I do in all of anything I do, anything I'm teaching, even in university, I tape everybody at the beginning with their permission, and I say, where are you at in your life right now, and where do you want to be by the end of this course? And they say, well, this or whatever. And then at the end, I say to them, okay, now, where are you at today? And has it changed? And when they can tell me a story, and they all do, because I follow that model no matter what I'm doing, healing or education or whatever I'm doing, what happens is they tell me what they are doing now. And that shows me that it's more than adaptability. It shows me that they have moved more into resiliency. But I want to know how long they can maintain it. And if they can maintain it for 6 months, then I know that what I've done has created resilience for them to go forward and do other things. They might have taken other courses in the meantime too. And that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm always very cautious of when I read things, because I think we try to say our programs are creating resilience. And I think we need to look at what is it we're really creating? Mm-hmm. We've just done something. Maybe this is adaptability. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not resilience. Resilience determines whether they still maintain a level of moving forward in their life. Moving forward in their life isn't the same for everybody. It looks different. But if they're moving forward in their life and making decisions for themselves, because most people that I see in my practice are very dependent on the systems. When you see people become independent, you know that they must not be as anxious as they once were. Right. You know they must not be as depressed as they once were. Well, anger's the hardest piece to break down. It is, because it works so often. But I'm looking for how much independence do those clients have? How much are they doing? And so you might be able to speculate when you're doing resiliency models, if you can determine that the decisions that they're making now are their own decisions, mm-hmm. and they're very independent. They're not using other people to help them with that. They're doing it on their own. That shows that they're stepping into resilience. They're not just adapting.
Gotcha. Kerrie, there was one person had their hand up. Florence, we could probably take one more question. Florence, do you still have a question? Are you still with us? She might have had to step out.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, hi. Would you like to ask your question?
Absolutely. Ani bonjour. Zamini Kwenejejnakas. I come from, I'm living in Ottawa. I'm an Anishinaabe from Kenora, from Grassy Narrows. And I just want to say Masicho, Masi, Ikase for everything that you've said, because that's the exact way that we deliver our program in Ottawa. I'm from Inwashin Lodge. And my question to you is, it's easier to work with Indigenous people because we're able to get them into that spirit and into that mind frame and to that healing place. But we often work with CAS and different other people that don't understand that and will not accept that we have to come from that trauma base. We have to understand that before we can move forward. And given the time frame with CAS, it's an impossible task because they're being asked to move forward within the 6-month time frame, or that they're at risk at losing their children. How can we as workers kind of mediate that? Like, I'm constantly having to cross-control train people and educate when really I shouldn't have to.
Right. And that is a big thing, Florence, that we recognized in Alberta. And we have mandated training for every single CFS or CAS worker out there. So anyone who's working with Indigenous people anywhere in any agency is mandated to take training on who are Indigenous people, what happened, how do we do that? And so we don't come up against these walls anymore. It is mandated by the government, which is an amazing thing. And I'm surprised it isn't here. You're so close to the, not just a provincial government, right? But so we had to mandate it. We took the Truth and Reconciliation. We looked at the points that really pertain to CFS and CAS and said, this is what we do. And instead of having, because it's very vague, we actually sat down as elders. We had an elder discussion with CFS and we said, what does that mean to us? What does it mean to you? And we came up with plans of how everyone was going to be trained. Doesn't mean that everybody gets it when they're trained either, Florence. That's the big thing. Not everybody will get it. And so that's when you really run up against a real wall, a real barrier, when people don't believe you and they're not going to do what they need to do. And I call them on it. For that reason, I'm not very well liked by them, I must say, but I just do it in a gentle way. And I bring it right back to the Truth and Reconciliation, which says that when you are working with Indigenous kids, they have a right to work with elders and they have a right to go to their culture. And then we work with them ourselves once we get them, right? Not necessarily the other way around. And the biggest issue was trying to get that put into place right away, because it's a systemic process, right? Trying to give you money so you could go, so you can pay, give the elder the honorarium or whatever. That became a real barrier to us. So a lot of the agencies now that are applying for money, just to run their agencies, they are applying for money just for those elders so they can get those kids into those places right away. So it's a barrier in many ways, Florence. I know what you're saying, but it is certainly helpful when you have some agencies on your side and we just do it ourselves.
Mm-hmm. It's tiring when you have to do it by yourselves, but we have a whole community rally to be able to make those changes. So thank you.
Thank you, Florence.
Thank you for your question, Florence. And we are definitely at our time here, Kerrie. And so I want to just offer you such gratitude for your time and your teachings. I saw a lot of positive reflection in the chat, and I think I feel we definitely got a lot from our time together. So thank you so much. And I hope that you are I don't know, I hope our paths cross again, even though you are in the West and we are here in the East. And I know that I definitely have an interest in learning more about your model at some point, if that's ever a possibility. So thank you. Wish you well. And what I'm going to do now, remind people that I did put a link to our little evaluation form in the chat. Sarah, the prize maven, and I did some quick work behind the scenes to make things go more quickly. And we have our winners of the Richard Wagamese book, which is called it's the Embers book. Oh, sorry, now the full name is gone, but I put the link in the chat. And so our winners are Bobby Kuehl, Kuehl, and Joanne Morin. So congratulations to those two for their prize, and we will follow up with them next week. And finally, I'm going to invite Debbie Lovelace, who is our Indigenous co-chair of our coordinating committee, to come on and introduce our drummer, who's going to see us out. And so before we do that, I think I just want to thank everybody for joining us, and I hope you've enjoyed your time here as much as I have. So Debbie, will you introduce Nathan for us and let him drum us out? There he is. Hello, Nathan.
Sure, I will. There he is. Oh, you took your goggles off. I told him to leave his goggles on.
Can I just say I am staying? I'm just going to turn off my my video and my audio because I look forward to this. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chimigwich, Kerrie, your information was spot on and awesome and extremely useful. I will be in touch, my friend. Nathan was kind enough to offer to do a song for our closing today. So take it away, Nathan.
Hello again. Chimigwich for allowing me to offer.
Nathan, your audio is low again.
Is it low again?
Your audio's low, Nathan.
Hello. I don't know.
Can hardly hear you.
Uh-oh, we might just have to make do with a low audio if we have to, but
I might have to go and scream.
Yeah, because I can hardly hear you at all.
Debbie, I'm gonna come and invade your room, okay?
okay, he's coming to you.
Okay.
Okay, he's on his way.
He just has to run across the hall.
Okay.
Look at my birthday celebration balloons there.
I'm actually going to turn off his camera here.
Well, I should just move and let him have my chair.
While we're waiting for Nathan, I just again want to thank everybody for joining us for these past couple of days. And for those who are able to hold on here to the very end, it's
On the
really
long walk.
wonderful.
Really long walk. All right. As I was saying, let's say Chimigwich for allowing me to be here and to be able to sing a song and to honor all of your work that everybody has been, been doing. And yeah, I'd just like to say Miigwech for everybody's work. And yeah, the song is for everybody who's participating in this. Oops. I'm not too sure how the audio is going to react with the drum and the singing, so one might cut each other off. Sorry.
language, Nathan. That was awesome. You need a drink? He lost his voice now.
Did he? Nathan, thank you so much. Having your energy and your voice and your spirit open us up and now bring us to a close is a real gift. Thank you so much. And just wish you all the best and have a lovely rest of the day and weekend. And you too, everybody else. Debbie, thank you for your bringing us as well with the opening and closing. It was really appreciated. And thanks to everybody who participated. And those of you who have stood by here as we've gone a little bit over, but what a wonderful way to end things. I hope you enjoyed these past couple of days, or if you came to our Indigenous Sharing Circle on Wednesday, these last 3 days, it's been a lot of fun and I've learned a lot. And I guess just repeating that Bobby and Joanne, Bobby Cool and Joanne Morin were the winners of the Richard Wagame's book. And we'll follow up with all of our prize winners next week. And I think that's about it. Take good care, everybody. Here I will, if you want to give a little wave as you're heading out, I've unlocked the video function. Oh, look, there's Florence and Kerrie. Hello, Kelly, Crystal. Wonderful to see your faces. This has been a lot of fun. And I think,
It's nice to see the faces instead of the little black boxes.
It is nice to see the faces. There's Bobby who won a book. Hey, Bobby, you won a book. Yay.
Get to the top of the mountain yet, Tim?
Thank you for my book there, Cindy. I'm going to
Oh,
look forward to it.
I see. I hope you do. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Have a good weekend and thank you. Loved the afternoon. So happy that I signed up.
Good.
Thank you.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Take care, everybody. And hopefully we'll see you soon. Self-compassion event on March 12th. I don't think you want to miss it. Kristen Neff, it's going to be quite something. And if Kerrie still happens to be on, again, much gratitude from, I'm sure, all of us for your time today and all of our presenters. Andrea and Tanya, that was quite something to make maybe a subject that might be a little dry, perhaps, like health promotion. I think they did a great job of making it engaging. And then let's not forget BK yesterday, and learning all about emotional intelligence. That was quite something. And maybe perhaps, since there's a few people here and I still have some energy to talk, a final shout out to our zone chairs, to both Yvette, Debbie and Rachel, Maureen and Dawn and Ellen and Lori, just the work that you're doing as well. So, okay, I probably should stop talking now because who knows what else will come out. It's Friday evening and my brain has shut off. So just all the best to everybody. And hopefully we will see you soon. So unless anybody else has a comment, I know I'm tired of my voice.
You rock, Sydney.
Thank you, Debbie. Take care, everybody.
Ciao.
Ciao.